Welcome everyone as we continue our journey through Stephen's oration of the Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Message before the Sanhedrin. In this session, we will cover Acts chapter 7, verses 20 through 43. Now we'll briefly review Stephen's timeline so far. He has covered Abraham. He covered the unconditional promise given in Genesis 12, and he covered the conditional promise, the conditional arm of the promise when he requested how will he know that he will become a great nation. And we saw the flaying of the animals in Genesis 15. And Yahweh said to Abram, "Know for certain that your seed are to be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. But the nation whom they serve I am going to judge, and afterward let them come out with great possessions." Then we went on to see the union between Abraham and Sarah as they birthed Isaac. And Isaac was the covenant son, and that's reviewed in Genesis 17, verse 19. And Elohim said, "No, Sarah, your wife, is truly bearing a son to you, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I shall establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him." That is extremely important. The covenant would come through Isaac. Then Stephen goes on to review how Joseph was sold into Egypt by his brothers and becomes second in command to Pharaoh. In verse 9 and 10 of Acts 7, we read that Stephen tells the Sanhedrin, he brings them back, he takes them back through history, and he says the ancestors, becoming jealous, sold Joseph into Mitzrayim, Egypt. But Elohim was with him and delivered him out of all his afflictions and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, sovereign of Egypt. And he appointed him governor over Egypt and all his house. Yahweh makes a way where there seems to be no way. Then there is a famine in the land, which repositions Isaac and the patriarchs to Goshen in Egypt, until last session we reviewed another sovereign arose who did not know Joseph. Now Stephen recalls how Yahweh calls Moses as the servant to lead his people out of Egypt, out of captivity. In Deuteronomy chapter 34:7, we read, "And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his freshness gone." So Moses' life consisted of 3 very distinct 40-year intervals. Likewise, the intervals from Abraham to the Messiah consisted of 3 very distinct groupings of 14 generations. We read about that in Matthew chapter 1, verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David until the exile to Babel were 14 generations, and from the exile to Babel until the Messiah were 14 generations. So Yahweh is very precise with his patterns of time displayed in our 3-dimensional world, and everything in his word has meaning. Yahweh does everything for a reason, to fulfill all of his prophetic word. So we see Moses' life broken into 40-year increments. The first 40 years he spent in Egypt, and he was raised in Pharaoh's house. So infancy to 40 years of age before he fled Egypt. And he fled to Midian, and he marries Zipporah, one of 7 daughters of Jethro, and has 2 sons. And then next we see him in the wilderness. Moses is called by Yahweh at the burning bush to lead his people out of Egyptian captivity. So we begin Acts chapter 7, verse 20. At that time Moses was born, and he was well pleasing to Elohim, and he was reared 3 months in the house of his father. But when he was exposed, the daughter of Pharaoh took him up and reared him as her own son. And we read about that in Exodus. So we see how Stephen started his oration of the Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Gospel Message from the book of Genesis. Now he's taking his ancestors and relatives through the timeline of Exodus and the birth of Moses. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1 through 10, we read, "And a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi." So Moses' parents were both of the tribe of Levi. "And the woman conceived and bore a son. And she saw that he was a lovely child, and she hid him 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took an ark of wicker for him and coated it with tar and pitch, and put the child in it and laid it in the reeds by the edge of the river. And his sister, Miriam, stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her young women were walking by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her female servant to get it, and opened it, and saw the child. And see, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him, and said, 'This is one of the children of the Hebrews.' And his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?' And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' And the young woman went and called the child's mother." How beautiful is that? "And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away and nurse him for me. Then I shall pay your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, saying, 'Because I have drawn him out of the water.' And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Mitzrites, and was mighty in words and works." Stephen continues before the Sanhedrin in verse 23 and 24. "And when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended and revenged him who was oppressed, smiting the Egyptian. And he thought that his brothers would have understood that Elohim would give deliverance to them by his hand. But they did not understand. And the next day he appeared to 2 of them as they were fighting, and urged them to peace, saying, 'Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong one another?' But he who was wronging his neighbor pushed him away, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you wish to kill me, as you killed the Mitzrayim yesterday, the Egyptian yesterday?'" Oh, that was very unnerving for Moses to hear him say that. So in verse 29, "And at this saying Moses fled, and became a sojourner in the land of Midian, where he fathered 2 sons." And that is recorded in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11 through 15. "And in those days it came to be, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brothers and looked at their burdens. And he saw a Mitzrayim striking a Hebrew, one of his brothers. So he turned this way and that way, And when he saw no one, he thought no one was looking, he struck the Mitzrayim and hid him in the sand. And he went out the second day and saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. And he said to them, and he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why do you strike your neighbor?" And he said, "Who made you a head and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Mitzrayim?" And Moses feared and said, "Truly the matter is known." And Pharaoh heard of this matter, and he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So you can see how Stephen is pulling from the Torah, the beginning of Yahweh's word. He's pulling the history from Genesis. He's pulling the history from Exodus. And he's pulling and testifying the very words of Scripture, not his own. He's orating the Scripture. So, do we fully understand and see what Stephen is doing? To fully understand the plan and purpose of Yahweh, one must go back to the beginning. You must go back to the beginning. You cannot throw out the front of the book. It's not only about the New Testament. You must begin and understand the beginning of the book. Because one cannot understand the back of the book until one understands the front of the book. If only the back of the book is emphasized, believers will not even truly know who they are. They won't. And to this day, they don't know who they truly are. For instance, many today believe the church, quote unquote, was birthed in Acts chapter 2, when actually his people, a mixed multitude, were birthed by faith and the covenant of Passover in their exodus out of Egypt. Yahweh declared them as his son, his firstborn, and they were named Israel. Therefore, the birth of his people is declared in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22. We read, and Yahweh is speaking to Moses, and he tells Moses, "And you shall say to Pharaoh, thus said Yahweh, Israel is my son, my firstborn." And later in Exodus chapter 12, verse 48, we read, "There is one Torah, one Bible, for the native born and for the stranger who sojourn among you." In Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 17, there were only 2 sticks that Yahweh will bring together as one: the house of Ephraim and the house of Judah. There is not a third stick called the church. Bad theology has infiltrated most churches. Congregations of believers don't even realize that they are Israel, born from above by faith. The natural branches and those grafted in must by faith receive Yahusha to become part of Israel, the one new man born from above. All must be born anew. The Zionist state of Israel in the Middle East is not the Israel of the Bible that Yahweh calls his firstborn. Israel born from above by faith comes from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation across this earth. And yes, there are even believers in the state of Israel, where sadly one cannot even utter Yahusha's name, our Savior's name. There's something very wrong with that picture. Is there not? So Stephen continues, "And after 40 years were completed," and that was in Midian, A messenger of Yahweh appeared to Moses, him, in a flame of fire in a bush, the wilderness of Mount Sinai. And Moses, seeing it, marveled at the sight, and coming near to look, the voice of Yahweh came to him, saying, I am the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, and the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. And Moses trembled and did not have the courage to look. But Yahweh said to him, Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is set apart ground. So it's very important to see that even Yahweh reviews with Moses that he is the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is the sequence of which the covenant would come through. And once again, Stephen is pulling from Exodus now in chapter 3. And Moses was shepherding the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. And the messenger of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked and saw the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, Let me turn aside now and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. And Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, and Elohim called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not come near here. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is set apart ground. And he said, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, the Elohim of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. And Yahweh said, I have indeed seen the oppression of my people who are in Mitzrayim, Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their slave drivers, for I know their sorrows. And I have come down to deliver them from the land of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. And now see, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, oppressed them. And now, come, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. What an assignment. Stephen continues. I have certainly seen the evil treatment of my people, again pulling from Exodus, that very chapter that we were reading, who are in Mitzrayim. And I have heard their groaning, and have come down to deliver them. And now come, let me send you to Egypt. This Moses, whom they had refused, saying, Who made you a ruler and a judge? This one Elohim sent to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the messenger who appeared to him in the bush. This one led them out after he had done wonders and signs in the land of Mitzrayim and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the children of Israel, Yahweh your Elohim shall raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. Him you shall hear. This is he who was in the assembly in the wilderness with the messenger who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, who received the living words to give to us. We must have those living words. We must hear those living words. We must understand our covenant with Yahweh, unto whom our fathers would not become obedient, but thrust away, and in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. So Moses' ancestry from Abraham, it went from Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, to Levi, to Amram, and then to Aaron, Moses, and Miriam, all siblings. Now, fast forward 40 years, Stephen pulls from Exodus 32, he pulls from Deuteronomy chapter 4 and chapter 17, he pulls from 2 Kings 23 and Amos 5. Again, knowing the front of the book is foundational to knowing the Elohim we serve. Verse 40, saying to Aaron, make us mighty ones to go before us, for this Moses who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days, and brought an offering to the idol, and were rejoicing in the works of their own hands. So Elohim turned and gave them up to worship the host of the heaven, as it has been written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring slaughtered beasts and offerings unto me during 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? And you took up the tent of Molech and the star of your mighty one, Kaun, images which you made to bow before them? Therefore I shall remove you beyond Babel. The history reviewed in Acts chapter 7, verse 40 through 43 is still repeating itself today, as quoted from Amos chapter 5, verse 25 through 27. The host of heaven today is still being worshipped, along with taking up the tents of Molech and the star of Kaun, or sometimes called the star of Remphan. One would have to have their head in the sand not to see that Satan has cleverly convinced believers to worship on holidays of his little g gods, celebrating his little g gods, instead of Yahweh's feast days, our very wedding rehearsals to prepare us for his return. Like Israel in the first Exodus, we have been born in Egypt. We've been born into slavery. And we were raised in deception, following pagan holidays. But we don't have to remain in captivity, because the truth, his word, sets us free. And this is exactly what Stephen was trying to do before the Sanhedrin, set his brethren free. The real truth today, it's just a click away. But many cannot, or sadly will not, receive the truth. So they choose to continue celebrating the lies and deceptions of Satan, saying, that's not what it means to me. But you see, it doesn't matter. It's what it means to Yahweh, and how it's clearly disobedient to his word if you're a true believer. Just like Israel out of Egypt, many choose to celebrate the golden calves of this world. The golden calf holidays, man-made traditions of this world. The very holidays he told the Israelites not to get involved in. Is he not going to frown on this generation when he frowned on the first generation out of Egypt? Think about that. Will history repeat itself? Yes. For the first Exodus was a type and shadow of our coming greater Exodus. Will another sovereign arise who did not know Joseph? Well, he'll be a little bit different. And we read about that in Revelation 13. Because the first and the second beast of Revelation 13, they are rising. But we must remember, we are more than conquerors in Yahushua HaMashiach. We are victorious in him as long as we walk in covenant with him. The adversary will arise, but he does know Yahushua. and he knows his time is short, he will work through the flesh of man to kill, steal, and destroy as many of Yahweh's people as he can. It will not be a walk in the park for him, however, because greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. In Isaiah 11, we read a description of the second Exodus, sometimes referred to as the Greater Exodus. So this will soon take place. So take heart. Isaiah 11, verse 10. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, standing as a banner to the people. Unto him the nations shall seek, and his rest shall be esteemed. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh sets his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Asher and from Mitzrayim, from Pathros and from Cush, from Elam and from Shinar, from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And he shall raise the banner for the nations and gather the outcast of Israel and assemble the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. He's going to bring those two sticks together. And the envy of Ephraim shall turn aside, and the adversaries of Judah be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah not trouble Ephraim. You see, he's bringing together the two sticks. He's forming the one new man in him. And Yahushua HaMashiach is the head. We are the body. We are the body of Yahuwah, Yahushua HaMashiach. We are made up of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. We are the multicolored coat of Joseph. And we all that are part of the one new man have been born anew, born again, washed by the blood of the Lamb, and are his. We are Israel. So I want you to be blessed and stay in peace, for our redemption draws nigh. In our next session, we will conclude Stephen's oration of the Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Gospel Message. Until then, walk in his covenant, keep looking up, and worry not about tomorrow, because Shalom is found in him. Blessings to you, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.